start. I'm going to wait as long as possible for as many people to arrive, and I'm sure they'll continue to arrive. On behalf of Crossroads, I want to give sincere thanks to the American Bible Society, with which we organized tonight's event. My name is Angelo Matera. I'm a member of the Crossroads Advisory Board. Nowadays, despite the rise of a startup culture populated by idealistic 20-somethings and the growth of a vibrant social enterprise sector, the cliche still dominates that the first rule of business is relentless pursuit of self-interest and a sort of Hobbesian war of all against all. Despite the lessons of the recent financial crisis and the promises of a new generation of companies like Google to, quote, not be evil, the prevailing philosophy, as found in the financial press and business schools, is that success is everything and that human concern should not get in the way of the cold logic of profit maximization. Andreas Widmer has a different perspective, which he will share with us tonight. He is living proof that success in business does not require cutting off our humanity. On the contrary, our humanity is our greatest business asset, which is played out as we see in day-to-day business life, despite the prevailing ideology. Our desire to seek the good of others, to work together with them, our need to build beautiful things, our faith in God, all these things are in fact good for business and are in fact necessary to practice entrepreneurship happily and successfully, especially in the long run. Mr. Widmer learned to be an entrepreneur by being, first of all, a human being, and his faith has played an important role in this process. Before giving him the stage, let me read some brief biographical notes. Mr. Widmer is Director of Entrepreneurship Programs at the Catholic University of America and President of the Carpenters Fund. He was previously the co-founder of Seven Fund, a philanthropic organization run by entrepreneurs who invest in original research, books, and films to further enterprise solutions to poverty. He is the author of The Pope and the CEO, Pope John Paul II's Lessons to a Young Swiss Guard, a book exploring leadership lessons that Widmer learned while serving as a Swiss Guard protecting Pope John Paul and refined during his career as a successful business executive. Andreas works closely with top entrepreneurs, investors, and faith leaders around the world to foster enterprise solutions to poverty and promote virtuous business practices. He has developed entrepreneurial initiatives at the intersection of business and faith, such as the Catholic Mental Models Project, a research effort through his social science research firm, GSPEL LLC. He serves on the advisory boards of many institutions, and he is a frequent speaker around the world on issues related to business ethics, entrepreneurship, business leadership, productivity, and the challenges of executive management. Let's welcome Andreas Widmer.
How much time do I have? 45? 45. Thank you all for being here. Can you hear me all right? I like to walk around, and so if I don't need to use a microphone, I'd rather just do it this way. Well, let me start by saying I sometimes have to pinch myself to think that I worked with a saint. And we don't have to canonize John Paul II for me to understand that that's a saint, that he was a saint. I remember when I met him for the first time as if it was yesterday. It was actually, we're coming very close up to the anniversary now. It was on the evening of December 24th, 1986 is when I met him for the first time. And I know that because the 24th, where I'm coming from, is actually, it's Christmas Eve, and where I come from in Europe, I was born in Switzerland in a small village. That's the event for Christmas. So it's not the 25th, it's the 24th. The vigil is when you celebrate Christmas, for the vigil of the 24th. And that's the evening I met him for the first time. The story is that I actually didn't, I actually started about a month or so earlier in the Swiss Guards. Now the Swiss Guards is a foreign legion, you know, so all Swiss, everybody in the Swiss Guards is from Switzerland, young men from Switzerland, about 20 years old. You start when you're 20, and you can do that for 2+ years. You have to sign up for at least 2 years. You have to have done your military service before, but then you leave Switzerland and you go, in effect, to serve a foreign head of state, because the Pope is the head of state of the Vatican, and that's a foreign country to Switzerland. And that's why the Swiss Guards is a foreign legion, except, and you know, Switzerland is actually not even a really Catholic country. We're a minority in Switzerland, but we have been serving the Holy Father for over 500 years now. It goes back to before the Reformation. And the agreement we have with the Vatican is that while we serve in the Swiss Guards, we give up our Swiss citizenship and we become Vatican citizens. So while you work as a Swiss Guard, you're a Vatican citizen, and then when you're done, you're allowed to go back and get the passport back and not be prosecuted, which if you were an American, you would go serve in the Mexican army and come back, you'd be prosecuted and put to jail for treason, right? But the Swiss make one exception for that, and that is for the Swiss Guards. So I entered in there, and you start with that's after my military service, you start with the recruit school. And in that recruit school, it's it's an elite organization that the primary focus is just to protect the Holy Father's life. So we're bodyguards. What you're seeing with the uniforms is sort of the outside picture of it. It's mostly the younger guards who do that. In real effect, what you do to protect the Holy Father is like any other secret service with a suit and tie, and that's how you do most of your work. So I went in there and I trained for over a month, and the way this works is there's a test at the end. And if you pass that test, then you can, you're done, and they'll keep you and you can serve for your 2 years. Now, they give you a chance to do that early, to graduate early if you wish. And that's what I tried. That was my whole focus when I got there, just trying to finish this test early. And there's actually several tests and so on. And I did. I actually finished the test. I took my test on the 23rd of December, which theoretically the test wasn't until the 29th of December. So I finished a week early and thought, great, now I'm going to just chill out here, get to know Rome, and then on January 1st is when my actual duty starts. So I get up on the 24th in the morning and I go leisurely downstairs and I want to go have my breakfast. And as soon as I come into the courtyard, the sergeant major comes out of his office. And I didn't really know the ins and outs yet. Because as soon as he comes out of his office, everybody else runs away. I didn't know why, so I just kept going. I was about to find out why. And he sees me and he says, "Hey, Widmer, what are you doing?" And I'm saying, "I'm going to have breakfast." And he says, "No, I mean, are you working right now?" And I said, No, see, I'm free. And he says, "Well, not anymore. You have to work tonight. Another guy fell ill. So I need somebody to go to do night duty tonight, and it'll be you." I said, "Time out. I'm not on yet, okay? January 1st is when I start." And he just looks at me and says, "You want to fight with me?" So I thought about it, but I decided, no, I don't really want to fight with you. But man, did I feel a resentment for this betrayal, in my view, as a 20-year-old. You know, that anger you can get for somebody doing this to you. So there I was, going to get my breakfast, and it sunk in to say, I'm going to have to work tonight, the whole night. Like, you start at 8 o'clock in the evening, and you finish at 8 o'clock in the morning. I mean, that's the night where the Swiss Guards were going to celebrate Christmas, Christmas Eve, and all of that. I got so enraged at this injustice. Now, the commander gives us, this was in 1986, so there's 115 of the Swiss Guards. And in 86, that was before the cell phone and before the internet and all of that. There was one telephone in the barracks. It was downstairs right in front of the dining room hall. And they would switch that free twice a year, once at Christmas and once at Easter, where the commander would give you the permission to call home, for free. And so, of course, out of 115 guys, the whole day, there's a line of 30 guys standing in line to get to that phone to call their parents and say hello and wish them a Merry Christmas or a Happy Easter. So I started to stand in that line in the afternoon once, I got freshened up and everything. And I remember standing in that line. A 20-year-old this just bubbled up in me. I was boiling with anger. And I remember standing in that line. I started to come up with new swear words for the sergeant. Nobody talked to me. I'm a new kid. I'm a new guy, right? And everybody else knew each other, and I'm standing there just fuming. And then finally, it was my turn to get to the phone. Now, let me say something first. I come from a very small village. I mean, the town is called Lucerne in Switzerland, where I'm from. But that's the capital, so we say we're from Lucerne. But I wasn't born, I didn't grow up in Lucerne. I grew up in a small village in the mountains. Have you ever seen Heidi? I'm the female version. I'm the male version of Heidi. That's how she would look. I grew up mostly outside in the mountains with cows and running around. And really, I had a very idyllic childhood. I'm the youngest of 6 kids. And my village had 400 people in it. I went to school where there's three classes in one schoolroom and one teacher, and they would, it's only a few kids, so they would, so it's really yesteryear. And being the youngest, what happened to me? How many of you are the youngest in your family? See, we have a brother and a sisterhood of being the youngest. I feel for you, because what happens when you're the youngest is anything you try, your older siblings are better at, even if they're no good at it. Because you're younger, and you measure yourself with them, and that's what happened to me. My older brothers, my older sisters, they were always better, and I tried to find my place. I tried to find out, what am I good at, who am I, what am I doing here? Everything I tried, they were better at. I started to feel uncomfortable and saying, I'm not really good at anything. But God gave me a pretty big body. I grew quickly, and so the one thing I excelled at was fighting. And so very quickly I started to be able to fight with my brothers. Of course, you get a good training for that. And so that's why I excelled in the military and everything. So I went all the way on to officer school in Switzerland, and they love it. We have a militia in Switzerland. They love that. The more you fight, the better. And they quickly advanced me in the military. I started at age 12 in the military, in the pre-military courses in Switzerland. But I feel like I sort of, the underneath the question of who are you really never really went away. But I blossomed in this, and I pursued the military career and applied for the Swiss Guards. So I'm standing at this phone calling home, and I dialed the number, and my father picks up. And there, I could hear all my siblings in the background right away. It was like my world just deflated. And my father says, "Hey, Andreas, how are you? And are they going to keep you? Did you pass the test?" And I said, "Yes, Dad, I passed the test. I'm going to stay. I'm okay." And it's the first time they heard from me in 2 months. And then he says, "Well, then I'm so proud of you. I wish you a Merry Christmas. How are you going to celebrate tonight?" I said, "Actually, I'm not." And I remember he said, "You're not? I thought that was the Vatican. Of all the places in the world, they should know to let you celebrate Christmas in the Vatican." I said, "Don't tell me about it. I don't, And as he said this, my mother was standing next to him, and she grabbed the phone away from him right away. Now, the other good thing about, or the good thing about being the youngest is that, of course, you have a very special relationship with your mother. Some people call the youngest the baby of the family. I don't. I think I'm her masterpiece. It took her 5 times to just get it right the way she wanted it. So I have a very good a strong relationship with her, and she gets on the phone, and it doesn't say a word. She just starts to cry. And you see, I have that thing that when my mother cries, I'm going to have to cry with her. But I have 20 guys standing behind me in the military. I tell you, this is the only time in my life I hung up on my mom. I just said, "Mom, I love you," and I hung up. My tears started to come down, and all I could do is run to my room, put on my uniform, and go report to duty at 8 o'clock. So the way the Pope is protected is in circles, and so the circles, there's one circle that goes, that is always focused on his apartment, but then otherwise, if he moves, one circle moves with him as well. And so I went through all the circles, and that night I was actually, my position was to be in to be in front of the apartment. Now with the Pope, they say, right now with Pope Francis, they talk about that he doesn't want to move into the palace. That don't believe everything the press says. He's not moving in there because it's a palace. Because what this is a simple 2-bedroom apartment on the top of a large building, which they call a palace. It's a very simple place. It's a very simple 2 bedrooms. It has a library, which is where the Pope comes out and says the Angelus, and the largest part of it is a chapel, and there's a dining room and a kitchen, and sort of a corridor around, and then at the end of the corridor is a door which goes out to the loggias, you know, the Raphael loggias around the center of the courtyard of the Vatican. And but before that, there's a little room about as big as this. So the door is there. There's a room. The guard locks himself in there, and you have a little table, a little desk, and you can sit there if you want. And there's it's a dark little room, and there's a lamp that has this cone light. You know, those lights that just come down, and you could sit there and read a book if you want, because again, you're alone. You're locked in, right? You lock both sides. I didn't read that night. You know what I did? I call it the perfect emotional storm. Have you ever found yourself accusing yourself of being a total loser? Well, that was happening to me. I knew that all the toughness that I built up around me was all a farce. It's all play. I just pretend. I knew that deep inside, I didn't know what was up or what was down. I said to myself, you're an idiot. Why? What are you doing here? You don't speak the language. They obviously don't care about you, because the first thing they do is break their agreement with you and send you to work, and then everybody else goes and party, right? Nobody reached out to me. Nobody said a word. I said, I made a huge mistake coming here. I joined the Swiss Guards not because of the Pope, believe it or not. I'm a product of the 60s and 70s. My catechesis, I knew more about Buddha after my catechesis, than I knew about Jesus Christ. The reason why I joined the Swiss Guards is because one of the guys came back to the village and said, guess what I am? And I said, what? And he says, I'm a bodyguard. And I said, wow, like with a bug in your ear and the gun and everything? He said, yeah. I said, where do I sign up? That sounds like me, right? So then I signed up, and he says, well, it's the Pope you protect. I said, fine, I'll protect the Pope. I don't have a problem with the Pope. But it wasn't I wasn't religious. I didn't get religion. To me, this was sort of a pretend thing. And I stood up there and I knew all that, and I accused myself of making the biggest mistake in my life. And I cried my eyes out, I tell you. And then the radio goes off, and it's the commander, and he says, Widmer, the Pope is going to go celebrate midnight mass. He's going to use your exit. Let him out. Let the Pope out? Yeah. When? Now. Okay, I guess I can do that. And so the way this works is there's these 2 doors. You have the keys, so you go into the first door and you unlock the door. And you don't open the door, like he opens the door when he comes. You know, I'm not sure he knows he's locked in, because whenever he comes, the door's open, because we know where he is, right? Where he goes. But that door is locked until I unlock it, and then he opens it. And then the other door I only open once he's with me, you know? All I could do is unlock the door, step back, and pull my uniform straight, and then the door opened. And then this huge door opens, and John Paul stood right there, and this warm yellow light started to flood into my room, into this little room. It was almost a reflection of how I felt. This light started to come in, and there he stood in the doorway. I've never met him before, never seen him before. He was a stately guy, pretty big guy, and he had this habit that when he was interested in something, he would tilt his head like this. And he tilted his head and he looked at me and he says, hey, you're new, I've never seen you before. What's your name? And I was so surprised, I basically gave him my social security number. You know, in the military where you say what my number is. And I didn't really say much, and he comes forward and he gives me his hand, and so our hands lock, and then he raises his eyes and he looks me in my eyes. And I thought, uh-oh. As soon as our eyes meet, he of course sees, I must have had eyes like this, bloodshot and everything. And I immediately noticed that he noticed my red eyes as soon as our eyes met. And he didn't ask, he didn't say, well, he didn't ask many questions. He just said, of course, this is your first Christmas away from home, isn't it? Boy, that was the wrong thing to say to me. I'm like standing there, my tears coming down my eye. I'm like, my lips. By the way, I'm his bodyguard. He's safe with me. I'll take care of him. No worries there. And he pulls me in with his hand, and he holds the other hand. With his other hand, he holds my elbow, and he looks me. He had these bright light eyes, and he looks me into my eyes, and he says, "You know, Andreas, I really appreciate what you're doing tonight. I'm going to go pray the Mass now, and I'm going to go pray for you. Thank you for what you're doing, the sacrifice you're making tonight." It was like a huge stone lifted off me, because finally somebody paid attention to me. Finally somebody reached out and says, "You know, that's a tough thing you're doing here." That's all I was looking for. Why this man? It's in retrospect, right there, all I was doing is saying, whew, finally somebody says I'm important and, you know, I matter. In retrospect, I'm saying, this was in 1986. This was at the height of the Cold War, where Poland could have blown up any second, where inside the church there were tensions from the left and the right, that later next year there would be a schism in the church. Like the Lefebvre would move away and ordain his own bishops. I always see the Pope, the image of the Pope, as somebody in the middle with two strings attached, and they're pulling both ways, and he's in the middle like this. Yet this man notices that the kid standing in front of his room, who's supposed to blend into the background, is missing his mom? How is that? You know, as I started to advance in my career and start to be a manager and be in charge of people, I asked myself, how is that? Because most of the time I'm focused on what I'm doing. Would you notice? Would you notice the person who comes, the valet person who comes and parks your car, how they feel, what the state of their soul, if they're sad, if they're disillusioned, if they have problems? The person at the desk in your company, the person who comes and cleans the garbage or something and takes out the garbage. Do you know their name? Do you know how they're feeling? Maybe they're sad right now. Would you know? How come he knows? What I found out eventually is that the reason why he knows is because he's a man of prayer. You see, the way that John Paul taught me how to pray is not to say, "God, here's what I want, and I want this." You know, I always like this in the church. I love to have when small children are in the church, because you can hear, "Wah, wah, wah," all that. That's what God hears. You know, it's just that small kids, they actually do it out loud. If you would actually hear what God hears, the whole church would sound like this, because we're all like this. We're just not verbalizing it, and the little kids, they do. But what John Paul talked about with prayer is to say, prayer helps me to see the world that God sees it. How does God see it? To start to pray and say, let me see the world with your eyes, so that I can go to where you see a need and act on it. And sort of rid myself of my own concerns, and to actually go out and be there and sense other people's souls and what they feel and how they're doing. It was at a specific point in my life there in the Guards, a few months later, where I remember seeing this guy. You know, the beauty of me going there providentially, without any faith, without any opinion about this, and I'm thinking this is all make-believe, is eventually to see John Paul and meet him man to man. Like, he was an older man, and I just saw him as a guy. And eventually I looked at him and said, whatever that guy has, that's what I want. That's the first step of conversion. How many of us live a life where somebody sees you and says, whatever she has, whatever he has, that's what I want? That was a pivotal point, an inflection point in my life. And he was very open about this. What he does is he says, you want what I have? It's him. It's not me, it's him. You want him, not what I have Jesus Christ. That's what you want. How often in our culture today, with the super duper CEOs and the personality cults and the famous, we get this admiration And you know, we keep it and we say, look at me. You know, I'm such a big cheese. You know, look at me, what I achieved. Look, I built this company, I do this, and I have that and that. He was a way sign. He wouldn't take it for 1 second to be admired. He would always point to him and say, it's not me, it's him. How many of us use our position in whatever leadership we are, or whatever somebody admires us, as a way sign to him? Say, this is who you want. I think that's the core of how John Paul evangelized me. The other side of how he evangelized me is to say, you see, the way I grew up in a Germanic culture, Lucerne is Swiss German, so it's a Germanic culture, is always to see the faith as this unattainable ideal. It's up there, you know, you're down here. John Paul would, one of the common things that he would say to us, to the guards, is, I can't wait to see what you're going to do with your life, the greatness, the great stuff you're going to achieve. I can't wait to see it. He had more confidence in me than I had in my whole 20 years in myself. He was not like a critic. He was like a coach. But you know, the coach, if you're an Olympian and your coach is behind you, that doesn't mean that the coach says you only have to jump this high if he knows that you should be jumping this high. Except that the coach has confidence in you that you can jump this high and higher. Rather than the critic looking at you and saying, you're worth nothing. That was a fundamental difference in how John Paul approached us. That he had confidence in us. He gave me confidence through his confidence. That I could actually live up to the Christian ideal. One of the reasons why he proclaimed so many saints and blesseds is because he wanted to show us that, you know what, we all want to go to heaven. There's one way to get to heaven, that's become a saint, because everybody in heaven is a saint. So he says, let's go, let's do this. This is achievable, this is doable. With the grace of God, we can all become saints. And I have confidence that it is the plan. I have confidence that you become a saint. That really inspired me and it changed my life. The sad thing is, of course, that it was always a step forward and 2 steps back. And so by no means did I, figure this out right away. I ended up leaving the Swiss Guards. At the time, I was looking at the sermon and so on, and I met my wife, Michelle, who was in the back row there, in Rome, actually, and introduced her to John Paul. So since he was okay with her, I figured, okay. So we've been married for 23 years or so, 24 years. And we came to the US here, and I started to get involved in business. And it's very difficult and very tempting in business to start to see all of the efforts being, all of the success coming from you, rather than what it is coming from God. One thing that impressed me and that sort of came back to me of something that John Paul would talk about. You know, the beautiful thing about being a Swiss Guard is you're always there, 24/7. Wherever he goes, I go. When he talks, I hear it. If he meets with people, I'm right next to him. And so I became a fly on the wall, and I remember a lot of the times where I would just stand there and I would start to understand Italian better. And I could hear, you know, whether he speaks French or Italian or German or English, then I start to understand, you know, what he's saying. And it never meant anything to me to say, to break open the Word. You know, we're at the Bible Society here. To break open the Word. The first person who ever did this for me was John Paul II. And he did this with Genesis. That he told the Genesis story in a way that I've never heard it. He says, you know, when God thought about what he wanted to do, God thought, you know what, why don't I create the universe? And he thought about it, and then there it was. And then God thought, that's really good. And so why don't I create the earth, and I separate the water and the land, and I start to put fish in there. So God thought about this, and there they were. And you know, not just one or two. I mean, if it was for me, you know, I would make a fish, a gold one, you know, a goldfish and a silverfish, and that would be good. But no, he makes every kind of fish you can imagine. Unimaginable creativity. Then God thought of all the plants and of all the animals and everything, and he thought about it, and then boom, there it was. whenever God did this, he was very proud of it. You see, it's a little bit like, you know, I love to garden, but only for one thing. Actually, anybody garden here? There's only one thing worth gardening for. What is it? Huh? Not just vegetables, just one vegetable. It's actually a fruit. Tomatoes is the only worthwhile thing to grow. I mean, don't you? So I love to grow. So we grow things, and then I ask for a little piece, and I just worry about the tomatoes. Michelle can worry about all the other things. I put the tomato, I put a little thing around it. I even like to put some wood chips there so I can walk to water the things on both sides. And then when you're doing this all day in the spring, you step back, and have you ever had this feeling of saying, wow, that's good? That's what God felt when he was done with each piece of creation. He did a big old attaboy. I'm happy with this. This is good. The same pride that I feel when I'm done with the tomatoes. But then God said, you know what? Everything here is an object. I created all these objects. Nobody here is somebody. Nobody's like me. So God said, let me create somebody in my image. What's my image? I never die. And I'm a creator. Right? The first thing we know about God is to be a creator. So he goes to the ground, and he grabs this clay, and this huge chunk of clay, and he starts to shape the clay and then breathe life into the clay. And the person wakes up, and God says, hey, how are you? And the person says, I'm well. Who are you? And he says, I'm God, and you're the first person. Pleased to meet you. And the person says, okay, yeah, great. What's going on? And he says, come with me, come with me. And he goes on top of this mountain and looks out and sees all of the creation. And says, how do you like that? And this person looks out and says, wow, who made that? And God says, me? Wow. Why did you make it? For you. For me? How can all of this be mine? He says, I'll show you how. You see that little animal over there? You can make that yours by naming it. Do you know when you have a stray dog, it's not your dog. Once you name it, it's yours. You act by giving him a name. So he saw this little animal, fuzzy thing, running around, and God says, name it. And he says, bunny? God says, great, it's a bunny. From now on, this is a bunny, and it's yours. And how about this animal over there? Big old thing, leathery. Elephant? You're brilliant. I love it. Go out now the whole day and name everything you come across. And not just the animals, everything. All for you. I have something else to do right now, so I'm going to go and I'll meet you back at 6 o'clock tonight, here where we are now. I'm going to go do something. You go run around and name everything. So God goes, and guess when God came back that evening? What time? 5 minutes to 6. Why? God is Swiss. Cheap one, huh? I do it every time. God came back at 5 minutes to 6 because he was so excited to see how this person is going to love this so much. So when this person comes back from far away, God runs towards him and says, did you like it? And the person was not smiling, but was having a sad face. And God says, what is wrong? You didn't like it? I put so much thought into this. I even, some of this stuff is even funny. Like, did you see the animal that I made? It looks like a horse, and you can't tell if it's a white horse with black stripes or a black horse with white stripes. I thought that was funny. And he says, yes, that's funny. You're hugely creative and everything, but you know what? This is all good stuff, but not me. I'm alone. I'm lonely. And God goes, oh, I should have thought of this. Of course, I'm not lonely because I'm a communion. I'll fix it. And he puts the person back to sleep. And remember how he first went down and grabbed the clay? Now he didn't. He split the person. And he made 2 people out of it. Out of this person. And then he put them back, put the breath back into them and said, okay, now you're Adam and you're Eve. And they looked at each other and says, well, now we're not going to be alone anymore. That's a wonderful man, a wonderful woman. We're never going to be alone again. This is going to work for us. And he says, one thing, group huddle, come over here. And so they got together and God said, remember how I told you that you would never die and that you're a creator like me? You still are, except for one thing. You have a right and an ability that is given from me to create other immortal beings. The only immortal beings there are in the world. You're allowed to make other immortal beings. But for that, you need to come back together. One man and one woman, you need to come back together, and I will be there and breathe life into that child. And then you will have an immortal soul, an immortal life of a human person. But for all the other things which you can also be creative, that you could do yourself on your own if you want. We'll call this getting back together for a man and a woman, we call that marriage. And when you get together with other people or by yourself and you create other stuff in finishing, you know, this whole garden, I didn't finish it. I ask you to finish it. I'm giving it to you. You're the steward of this. I want you to finish all this. And we'll call this work. And when you work, I want you to imitate me. How did I create the world? I thought of it. And then I made it. And so as I think of it, it's first real in my mind, and then through my action it becomes a reality. And voila, there it is. It's a creation. And we'll call this work. So whenever you go to work, it doesn't matter what you do in life. Whenever you work, you imitate me. In marriage, when you create a new child, you imitate me. So both of these paths, whenever you imitate God, if you imitate God, you become more like God. So both of these are paths to holiness. Whenever you imitate God, you become more like God. Therefore, that's a path to holiness. And so John Paul would tell us that, of course, marriage as a path to holiness is a sacrament. And it's the highest form of human union that we can achieve. But, and you know, he talks, basically what I'm explaining is the theology of the body. And what he talks about is that there are objectives in marriage. What are the objectives in marriage? He even ranked them. JP2, that is. Give me an idea. What's the primary objective of marriage? Creation. When you two get together, you imitate God because you know what? God can't help but to create because God is love. The first priority in marriage and the first privilege, I want to say, in marriage is creation. That love is outgoing, love is sharing, love is going to have fruits. Love is fruitful. And so the first priority is this. What's the second priority? Second, okay, let's say second priority. John, you should like screaming this from the mountaintop over there. The second priority is to be to help each other emotionally, psychologically, to help each other grow, to help each other become more saintly, to provide for each other psychological, emotional needs. That has to do with the growth towards holiness. And the third objective is physical joy, physical, providing for each other, helping each other, having fun together, right? That's the third priority of marriage, or the third objective, and I want to say the third privilege of marriage. That's a sacrament. Let's look at this in the business side. And I'm not, you know, that's a sacrament. Business side is something on a much lower level, but there is a shadow of it, because it is a form of human relationships. He calls business a family, right? So we come together. What's the first objective of business? If we look at procreation over here, we look at creation. Business ought to be creative. We need to create something together. We need to do something that produces something. It needs to be fruitful. How do you measure fruitfulness in business? You deliver things, you create product, you invent something that didn't exist before, but you also produce it at a profit. See, to me, when you're doing a good business is profitable, because if it's done right, it's like my tomatoes. That I don't grow tomatoes so they can just have flowers. I'm growing tomatoes because I want to eat the tomatoes at the end. That's hard-coded into nature. It's hard-coded, but God hard-coded this into everything He created. Profit. Bearing fruit. The first privilege that we have is to create and to produce. Profit comes from produce. What's the second one? The second objective, if we transfer it over to business, has to do with taking care of each other. You see, the primary objective of work is to produce. The second is this path to holiness. To say, do we grow? He's famous for saying when we work, we don't just make more, we become more. Why? Because we imitate God. Do you become more at your work? If not, then you need to take a break and say, what am I doing here? How can I do work that helps me not just make more, but become more? And then the third privilege of work is material, of saying we need to take care of each other. We need to make sure that if you have a family and I have a family and we both work together, that you can feed yours and I can feed mine. And that the customers that we have get a good product at a good price. And that the people who invest in us, give us money to do the work, that they get a good return on investment. That is better than the comparable. It has to do with the physical benefits of business. And so I think these two, and that's what I'm hopefully being able to share with you tonight, is what I'd like to show you is how the theology of the body that John Paul II has put forth in some of his wonderful books can be throwing a shadow on what we do in business. Does this mean we look here at the dog-eat-dog world and everything is just for profit? Profit itself is not a bad thing, but only profit is a bad thing. I would like to, if you could put the analogy back over to the marriage and say, in marriage, human sexuality is a wonderful thing, but if only about human sexuality is not a good thing. Taking care of each other is a wonderful thing, but if it's only about this, then the convenience marriage is not a good thing. And the same applies to business, that we can use the very same theological insights that he has on the marriage side, and we can use those for business. The last point I want to say is an insight out of John Paul's view was discerned by a professor at St. Thomas University. Where are they? In Minnesota? The guy's name is Professor Goodpaster. Ken Goodpaster. He says, how do we know when we create a product, should we create the product just because we can? There needs to be a test to this, like a way to, a litmus test. And he said this most beautifully in that when we produce goods, we should look at our company and say, the goods that we produce, are they truly good? The services that we provide, do they truly serve? And the truly has to do with the end goal. You see, love is something that we need to apply not just in marriage, but in every human interaction. And when we apply love, you see in English, love is sort of a dime a dozen word, right? I love pretzels, I love my wife, and I love my dog. What's the difference? In Italian, some Italians here, there is a way to say to a person, I love you, that brings forth the meaning of the idea of love. And when you say that in Italian, you say, ti voglio bene, I want your good. Ti voglio bene, I want your good. That is love. So what's the good that you want for your wife? What good does the wife want for the husband and vice versa? What's the highest good you could want for somebody? The highest good you can want for somebody is to get to heaven, to live in forever ecstasy with God and His saints. The products that you produce, do they want the good of the person? Even if that person is not even a believer or a Catholic or anything, the actions you take don't have anything to do with the other person's beliefs. They have to do with yours. So the products that I produce, the services that I provide, do they love the person? Do I love the person with that? Are my products and my services furthering or hindering this person's path to heaven? And that to me is a litmus test of whether a business is good or needs to improve. Okay. Thank you.